About 20 million barrels of oil are produced daily. This is what was passing through here from a corridor no more than 34 kilometers wide. The oil powerhouse of the world controlled from one location. Until February 28, 2026, a pivotal date. On that day, 138 ships stopped crossing, something that has never happened in recent history, and oil went above $120 during market days. It shook and 230 tankers remained trapped inside the Gulf. In the midst of this chaos, there was only one place that had the solution, a place that had no full army, no seat in the United Nations, not even a passport, recognized in most countries of the world. However, it controls the Earth's most critical pipeline today. This is the story of this place, and how closing a narrow corridor changed 100-year-old equations. And now, let me show you something. Persian Gulf, semi-enclosed sea, Sultanate of Oman, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, Iraq. All its oil comes out of one door, the Strait of Hormuz, only 34 kilometers long, and inside it are 2 sea lanes, each 3 kilometers wide. Despite its modest size, around 20% of the world's oil supply flows through this narrow passage. About 25% of offshore oil trade and 20% of liquefied gas originate from one location, the Strait of Hormuz. Take a look at who controls the North Bank now: Iran. For years, Iran threatened to close the strait despite depending heavily on it themselves. But on February 28, 2026 AD, something no one expected happened. US-Israeli strikes, assassination of supreme leader, and in one moment Iran decided, if we fall, everything will fall with us. This story isn't about Iran, but about a people involuntarily drawn into a war that will redefine their future entirely. I want you to understand something basic before we continue. Many people talk about the Kurds in Iraq or the Kurds in Syria, in Iran, in Turkey, as if they are different peoples. They are not. Kurdistan is one geographical region, one mountains, one culture, one language in its vicinity. In 1923, after World War I, European leaders gathered in Lausanne, Switzerland, to redraw Middle Eastern borders without consulting the Kurds. That decision split Kurdistan into 4 regions: Rojava in Syria, Rojilat in Iran, Bakur in Turkey, and Bashur in Iraq. Bakur is northern Kurdistan, located in Turkey. Bashur denotes southern Kurdistan, situated in Iraq. The 4th largest people in the Middle East, they have no state, no seat at the United Nations, and no real voice in the decisions that determine their fate. This all ties back to the Strait of Hormuz and how one nation, fragmented across 4 regions, experiences the impact in entirely distinct ways, a perspective seldom shared. Let's start with Bashur, the Kurdistan region of Iraq, a region that has had a semi-independent government since 1991, has a parliament that has military forces called the Peshmerga, and owns the Kirkuk-Ceyhan line. But this line was not operating in March 2023, and was stopped by an international court in Paris due to a dispute over export rights. Between Erbil and Baghdad, 2.5 years, more than 30,000 in line losses stopped, and it returned to work with difficulty in September 2025. Only 5 months later,
Shutdown Hormuz.
it marks the start of an unprecedented transformation that remains enigmatic. Baghdad started exporting over 3.5 million barrels daily from Basra through the Gulf. All stopped Iraq as a country became economically paralyzed, and the only available solution was to contact Erbil, the old adversary with whom it had long argued over the Mari, borders and oil, and whose salaries were sometimes delayed for months. This is Baghdad itself that stood up and asked Kurdistan to help it. On March 18, 2026, Kirkuk's federal oil began flowing through Kurdistan's pipeline at 250,000 barrels a day, with negotiations exploring transporting Basra oil northward via Ceyhan.
This is a shift in the balance of power that has not happened since the founding of the Iraqi state.
Meanwhile, Iran and its allied militias targeted the region heavily, with 474 attacks in the first month alone.
The main gas field, Hormuz, shut down the electricity, cut off the Peshmerga bases, targeted the Kurdistan region, became simultaneously the most important alternative energy route in the world and a target of bombing. A nation holding a key solution for the world suffers strikes precisely because of this potential.
As for Trojilat Kurdistan, Iran,
10 to 15,000 Kurds inhabit western Iran in the Zagros Mountains.
The Kurdish language is banned in formal education. Kurdish political parties are banned inside Iran and operate from exile, and the main economy there is based on kulbar, men who carry goods on their backs across the mountains because there is no other economy, and every year dozens of them are killed by Iranian border guards' bullets. This is the basic situation. Now, what did he add? Closing Hormuz. Iran's economy is almost entirely dependent on oil revenues coming out through the Gulf. When Hormuz was closed, these revenues stopped, and since the Iranian regime funds its repression of the Kurds from these revenues, the closed Hormuz directly dries up this funding. But the deeper angle is what happened just 6 days before the start of the war on February 22, 2026 AD. 5 Iranian Kurdish parties that had been in deep disagreements for decades announced the formation of a unified alliance for the first time in history. The Kurdistan Democratic Party of Iran, Komala, PAK, Bijak, and Khabat. For the first time in 6 days, US-Israeli strikes began.
On Iran, the strikes in the Kurdish areas did not only target general military installations, but specifically targeted the security structure of the Revolutionary Guard, intelligence centers and border posts in the Kurdish provinces. The goal was to dismantle the god of oppression in western Iran. Exactly. Trump called the leader of the Iranian Kurdish alliance and said publicly that the Iranian Kurds should rise up. Then it all stopped. Iran fortified its positions, Trump backed down, and the Kurds stayed put. This pattern is not new, repeated in 1946 when the Soviet Union left them facing the Shah after American-British pressure. In 1975, Kissinger cut off support and left them facing the tyrant Saddam. In 1991, when Bush Sr. encouraged them to rise up, then watched them repress. But what has changed this time is structurally, for the first time in history, there is a unified political alliance of 5 parties, and the closed Hormuz continues to weaken the Iranian regime's economy day after day. The measure of Kurd Rogalat's freedom is the strength of their jailer, and for the first time in decades, the jailer is suffering. Now, Bakur Kurdistan, Turkey. Here is the most complex and least understood story. In February 2025, a full year before the Hormuz crisis, Öcalan, the leader of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, who had been detained since 1999, asked the party to dissolve himself and lay down arms. In March 2025, the party announced a ceasefire. And in May of the year 2025, it declared its official dissolution after 4 decades of war that killed more than 40,000 people. Why does this matter in the context of Hormuz? Because the PKK has for decades been a direct threat to the Kirkuk line, and the party has blown the line more than once. Investment in oil infrastructure in southeastern Turkey has always been linked to the security equation versus the PKK. Now that the party has dissolved itself, the line is more secure than ever, and Hormuz has closed down 2 sides of what has become the region's most important oil port. This intersection dissolved the party and closed Hormuz together. It created for the first time a situation that makes Turkey more in need of stability in its southeast than ever before. Not only to prevent independence, but because the chaos there threatens the most important source of geopolitical income, a property that Turkey now owns. The Kurds in Turkey live on the land through which the most important oil artery in the world currently passes, and this means that they have an economic lever that they did not have before. But transforming this lever into real rights requires organized and continuous political pressure, and Turkey is fully capable of benefiting from this stability without making any concessions in return if there is no pressure. Turning to Rojava, Kurdistan in Syria, this story marks the gravest note in the video. In January 2026, just 1 month before the closure of Hormuz, the Syrian transitional government launched an attack on Kurdish-controlled areas in northeastern Syria. The Syrian army regained control of Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor governorates, and with them recaptured Syria's largest oil fields, the Omar Field, the Tanak Field, and the Konoko Field. These fields, which had funded the Kurdish Autonomous Administration for more than a decade, moved to Damascus on January 18, 2026. On February 28, 2026, Hormuz closed and the price of oil rose to $120. The oil lost by Rojava 40 days before the closure of Hormuz suddenly surged in value to unparalleled levels. This is a pivotal moment in Syrian Kurdistan's story, but Rojava has also lost significant ground. Partnering with the US Army and overseeing the world's largest ISIS detention camps showcase the complex challenges. More than 50,000 are detained in the Al-Hol camp unit. With the closure of Hormuz and the rise of regional chaos, the threat of ISIS became an additional pressure card threatening Rojava, but this position is fragile, and the American presence in the region gradually declined throughout 2025. Rojava holds leverage with its strategic cards, but it often loses critical ones at a faster rate, although it occasionally gains replacements. But everything we've talked about so far assumes one scenario: the survival of the current regimes. What if the regime changes in Iran? What if a government comes in Tehran that is not equivalent to a government that accepts autonomy in Western Iran, or even a federal arrangement? Under such circumstances, the geopolitical dynamics of Kurdistan would shift dramatically, complicating existing alignments. One of the earliest strategic considerations was Erbil Basra, an ambitious alternative. Stretching 1,000 kilometers south from Kurdistan's center directly to the Gulf would open a new pathway.
This bold move implies only one thing. Bypassing Turkey entirely, Kurdistan could export its oil, skipping Ceyhan and escaping Ankara's conditions.
For the first time ever, true export independence could be realized.
The second option is access to the Strait of Hormuz through Iranian Kurdistan. If the Rojava Kurds gain autonomy, the western region of Iran becomes a direct oil corridor towards the Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz.
This does not only mean exporting Kurdish oil, it means a real economic revival for Rojava, which has lived for decades on the Kulabar economy, and relieving Bardan's pressure on Erbil.
The third option holds immense geoeconomic significance.
Caspian Sea.
The distance from Iranian Kurdistan to the Caspian Sea is less than 600 kilometers, much less than the distance to the Strait of Hormuz, and from the Caspian completely new routes open up towards Azerbaijan, towards Russia, towards Central Asia and the Eurasian energy belt. Ultimately, this equates to one result: freeing Kurdistan entirely from dominance by both Turkey and Baghdad. What's more, even Rojava, which has lost its fields to Damascus, is able in this scenario to transport its oil overland to Erbil, and from Erbil to Hormuz. The part that has no sea outlet finds its outlet through the part that has the line.
What is happening in Iran is not only an Iranian affair, it is the affair of Kurdistan with all its four parts.
Because Iran holds two keys at the same time, the key to repressing Rojava and the key to major geopolitical alternatives for all of Kurdistan. Regime change in Tehran does not just mean liberating 10 to 15,000 Iranian Kurds. It means redrawing the energy and trade maps of an entire nation that has been living for 100 years, waiting for this moment. Now, let me show you the whole picture. One nation divided into four, and each part faces a different equation. Bashar owns the alternative pipeline, and Baghdad needs it for the first time in history, but it is striking because it owns it. Rojava has reached the first political unity in its history, at the moment when its jailer collapses economically, but the major powers use it and do not guarantee it anything. Baku lives on the most important oil artery in the region, and the dissolution of the party gave it leverage that did not exist before. But turning this leverage into rights requires more than just owning the paper. Rojava lost its oil before its price rose, and what remains for it is a security partnership with the greater power.
It is a paper with a limited life.
This is the great paradox of Greater Kurdistan. The nation that owns lands with oil, has pipelines running through it, has strategic mountains, and has fighters that everyone wants. It does not have a single unified decision because it is divided between four countries, each of which has an interest in keeping it. Divided Turkey does not want them because they will demand the south of its trap. Iran does not want them because they will double its grip on its west. Iraq doesn't want them because they own its northern republic. Syria doesn't want them
because they control its east. And America.
You want them when you need fighters, and you forget them when the need is over. Now the bigger question: will the Strait of Hormuz be reopened? Negotiations that began between Washington and Tehran, but they collide with their structural butt, America and Iran. They could theoretically find a common denominator, but Israel entered this war with an entirely different goal, not to change Iran's behavior, but to end or weaken the Iranian regime in a way that makes recovery impossible. Any agreement that makes the Islamic Republic cry in a position of strength, Israel's agreement, will work to blow it up, and Trump finds himself faced with an impossible equation. Pressuring Iran to settle means ignoring Israel, and ignoring Israel is not an available option, and Iran knows that a settlement after the assassination of its supreme leader will look like surrender. The regime seeks to demonstrate resilience. The likely outcome is neither an agreement nor an all-out war. The likely outcome is a chronic gray state. Negotiations begin, fail, and resume Hormuz that does not fully open and does not remain fully closed. In this scenario, the Kurdistan-Ceyhan line remains no alternative, temporarily becomes a permanent sinner. For a long time, the Strait of Hormuz was closed to 230 tankers, stranded by the persistent high oil prices. The world is looking for an alternative path, and the alternative path passes from the middle of these mountains, from this people who have passed through centuries and have not disappeared. I do not know how this war will end. I do not know whether Greater Kurdistan will emerge from it stronger or more wounded, but I know one thing. For the first time in decades, a nation. No nation holds a definitive leverage card over a world that heavily depends on it. The question remains, will it know how to wield this power effectively?